much, Gleaves. It's great to be here. I last saw Gleaves 1 year ago at the Founders Breakfast for the Free Enterprise Institute Center for American Idea at River Oaks Country Club in Houston. He did a great job in the keynote address there. What I'd like to talk about today is a subject that is taken up in my book, Econoclasts, which is a history of supply-side economics, which of course culminated in the Reagan Revolution in the early 1980s in a restoration of American prosperity to the historical trend. Supply-side economics was born in the 1920s as a result of the Great Depression that didn't happen, that of 1919 to 1921. And what I'd like to do today is simply discuss why the Great Depression happened in the early 30s and not in the early 20s when the conditions were just the same. We used to think that capitalism caused the Great Depression. Back in the 1950s, when John Kenneth Galbraith was writing, it became a common view that corporations, stock traders, the market, in a word, caused the incredible downturn of the early 1930s, whereby industrial production fell by a third and unemployment displaced fully 1/4 of the national workforce. It was a crisis of capitalism, as the Marxists were prone to say. Quote, "The massive literature on the causes of the Great Depression has generated more heat than light." So said economist Robert Mundell as he accepted the Nobel Prize in December 1999. Mundell was right. All the literature hanging the Great Depression on a crisis of capitalism was misplaced. Here's what we now know. The fingerprints on the Great Depression, on what caused it, are all those of the government. The chief cause, probably the sufficient cause in the Aristotelian sense of the Great Depression, was in particular the way the federal government bungled its management of the gold standard. Let me restate, this strange bird, this bungling the gold standard, was the sufficient cause of the Great Depression. Or as Mundell again said in the 1999 Nobel Prize address, quote, "Had the United States raised the price of gold in 1928, there would have been no Great Depression, no Nazi Revolution, and no World War II." It was the greatest financial mistake in modern history, and the federal government of the United States is the one who made it. Over the next 20 minutes, I would like to explain this argument. The argument follows the life's work of Robert Mundell, the founder of supply-side economics, the Nobelist, and the greatest elucidator of this argument. Mundell's work, in turn, was based on economic research done in the 1920s, yet ignored at the time. Work done by such figures as Ludwig von Mises, Gustav Cassel, Charles Rist, John Park Young, and even John Maynard Keynes. Let's begin by taking a step back. Knowing why the Great Depression happened can only occur if we look into an earlier period and ask why the Great Depression did not follow World War I. The root cause of the decision that precipitated the Great Depression of the 30s, the bungling of the pricing of gold after 1929, this root cause itself was another U.S. mistake, particularly on the part of the rookie Federal Reserve a dozen years before, during the period of U.S. neutrality in World War I. Let me take you back to that time. From 1914 to 1916, while the European countries were at war in the Ottoman Empire, and the U.S. was not, Europe bought an inordinate stock of goods from the United States. However, the United States bought nothing from Europe in return, because, being at war, these countries were not producing things for sale. Therefore, in those 2 years, the United States took the logical move on gaining so much European currency that had no promise of buying goods and services, and redeemed those currencies for gold with the respective currency issuers, the European countries at war. What happened in that span is that a great part of Europe's monetary gold stock migrated to the United States, and indeed to other neutral nations who were not fighting World War II, such as World War I. such as Argentina, Spain, Japan, Holland, and Switzerland. In the space of 2 years, just 2 years, 1914 to 1916, US of peace, the monetary gold stock of the United States doubled. Here, the Federal Reserve, a green institution, green in the old sense, that is to say it was rookie, having only been born right before the war started in late 1913, made a momentous and flawed decision. The Fed chose to print dollars corresponding to the new gold coming into the US. From 1913 to 1919, the quantity of dollars issued doubled, just as the quantity of US monetary gold doubled. The effect of this decision was to double one thing more, the price level. From 1913 to 1919, the Consumer Price Index increased by 102%, much of it before US entry into the war in spring 1917. This was the only example of peacetime inflation in the United States to date. To holders of gold, and these included many average Americans, all this was an outrage. If you had an ounce of gold in 1913, you could get $20 from the US Treasury, then the government's official conversion rate. And in 1919, for that same ounce of gold, you could still get $20 for it from the feds. But $20 in 1919 could buy you half as much stuff as in 1913. By doubling the dollar stock in the face of the remarkable gold inflows and creating a mega inflation, the United States had unwittingly halved the real value of all monetary gold. This was a mistake. In 1919, 6 years into its existence, and beginning to get its sea legs finally, the Federal Reserve realized it had made a considerable blunder, this inflation and this halving the real value of gold. So it tried to undo its mistake. From 1919 to 1921, the Federal Reserve proceeded to suck dollars out of the economy. It did this by various means, raising interest rates, raising bank reserve requirements, sterilizing new gold inflows. The results came fast and hard. Prices dropped, a deflation, by 25%, meaning that the Fed was halfway there towards gaining back the 1913 price level. But you see what this mega now deflation after 1919 meant for the economy. Nobody wanted to spend money. By holding money, you got richer, a lot richer. By taking the price level, which was at 10 in 1913, from 20 to 15 from 1919 to 1921, the Fed made sure that people who held but did not spend dollars saw the value of those dollars increase by fully 1/3, which is 20 divided by 15. With the Fed giving every indication that this deflation policy was going to be maintained until the price level hit 10 again, the 1913 level, there was all the more reason to hold and not spend your currency. For 15 divided by 10 is 50%. If you deferred purchases until the Fed was finished, your money would quickly appreciate by half. So nobody spent anything. And from 1919 to 1921, the United States had the worst depression in its history. Unemployment, which hadn't even been a word 20 years before, hit 15%, perhaps 20%, as Anthony Schley said last night. Easily 50% higher than in any previous economic crisis. Massive strikes occurred, even though there were no unions, and all the blame was put on foreign agitators, as the likes of Emma Goldman were deported and packed off to the old world. It wasn't foreign agitators. The only reason the incredible recession was occurring was that the Fed, of its own accord, was engineering a historic deflation. Finally, intelligence stepped in. New York Fed President Benjamin Strong finally got hold of the board and told it to cut it out.